Well, welcome back to the Know Your Numbers podcast. This is your host, Chris McCormack, and today's guest is Mr. Daniel White. He is a brother in Christ. He is a real estate investor, and he's looking to live out the Great Commission through the marketplace. So, Daniel, I'd love to hear a little introduction, but first and foremost, welcome to the show, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Chris. Glad to be here. Really excited about it.
Yeah. So if you don't mind just giving a more in-depth introduction. I know I usually lead, but I know the guest can always give a better better background on who they are and what you do.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I can do that. So I live in Lexington, Kentucky with my wonderful wife and our two kids. Amelia is 2 years old and Isaiah is about 9 months old. So we're just getting started with our family. And it has been just a joy to be a father and husband. My wife's in ministry, and I am background in construction and real estate.
Awesome. And I guess that's a good introduction and a good segue into this conversation, because one of the questions that I have for you, Daniel, is how or when you realized that you could live out the Great Commission and serve God without having to be directly involved in ministry. You know, you hear of the pastors, and a lot of people have that dream of being a pastor, but oftentimes there's other ways that don't always get talked about.
Yes, absolutely. So it's a really kind of a long story for me. So I don't know how much you want me to get into.
We'll do the whole thing.
Whole thing from the beginning.
Yeah.
All right. So I really had a near-death experience as a baby.
Wow.
And my sister was trying to help my mom give me a bath, and our water heater was broken. There was no scald guard, and heated up the water really hot, put me in, and I got third-degree burns all over my body and rushed to the hospital. My parents were amazing parents, and they had a great church community around them, and reached out to everybody they knew and said, hey, pray for Daniel. He's, in intensive care. The doctor comes in and says, yeah, your kid might survive, but if he does, it's going to be, months in intensive care, and, he's going to have multiple skin grafts all over his body. And the next day, the doctor comes in and is like, I don't know, like, what happened, but you can take your son home. He's fine. And I don't know if it's magic or what, but it was just an incredible story of God just healing my body. And, and I guess he, has a plan and a purpose for me. Grew up in the church and really came into a personal relationship with God through Jesus when I was probably about 4 or 5. I was very, very young. Yeah. And my sister, as soon as she came to Christ, she immediately came to me and was like, I've got to share this news with you. This is incredible. And so, it was very much like a childlike faith.
Yeah.
And so really over the last, 20, 25 years, I've been walking that out, and what does that look like in my life, and how do I become more like Christ, and how do I live as a follower of Christ, and everything. So then grew up in a small town in southern Kentucky, very small town, and really got interested in entrepreneurship, and was always trying to think of ways to start businesses, and how many lawns do I need to mow before I can hire people, and worked on a farm and worked in construction. Got an opportunity when I was 9 to help a contractor who was building my family's house. And he was just a great guy and slowed down and just explained how he was doing everything, and really allowed me to feel like I was part of the process. And, I'd come and help pick up tools and do anything that I could just to be a part of that group and really learn from them and see what they were doing. And so the same thing happened about a year or two later when he built my uncle's house on the same family farm. And so I got an opportunity to work more and actually get paid that time. And
Yeah.
so I think that was one of my first paid jobs when I was 11.
Wow.
And so work and making money was always a part of growing up. And then, learning those construction skills, I was able to do independent contract work for friends and family. Started buying my own, bike and car, and just things as a teenager, and being very independent.
Right.
And I got an opportunity to enter an entrepreneurship contest at a local college when I was about 17. And I entered the competition, came up with a unique business concept, and wrote the business plan and presented it to the panel of judges. And they were like, "Oh my goodness, like this is really a good idea, and you need to start this." And I'm like, "Okay, well, what do I do next?" And so I end up getting a coach, and there was a program that offered free entrepreneurship coaching. And I was able to launch the business and learn the process and everything. And it was really, really educational. I feel like I got probably more knowledge from just that 1 year of running the business than I got from or I would have gotten from like 4 years of business school. Right.
Wow.
I was actually doing it, and seeing what the market was, how it was reacting and everything. So 17 years old, I'm working a part-time job, finishing high school, running this business, and out of the blue, God just calls me to move to Chicago and do mission work. And I'm like, that's completely out of left field. Like that, that wasn't even on my radar. I don't know anybody in Chicago. I've got all these plans, like this is where I'm going. And just throughout the week, he wouldn't just let me forget about it. I was constantly like, I've got to do this. I've got to do this. I've got to do this. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to obey, and I'm going to see what happens.
Yep.
And so I tell my parents at the end of the week, and I'm like, I really feel like God's calling me to do this. I don't know why, but I'm going to obey. And so they had some connections up there and were able to get me connected to somebody. And I packed my car, drove up to Chicago. This is a kid from a small town in rural Kentucky, going into the inner city, and I'm like driving in. I'm like, this is kind of crazy. And thankfully, everything went really well, and I lived up there for about 4 months and did prison ministry. And that's a whole story in and of itself, going into all the prisons in Illinois, speaking in front of a bunch of inmates and sharing the gospel with them, and sharing like what we did in the program and stuff. But ended up running a food pantry and helping them with job training and equipping them as they came out of prison, and would really do life on life discipleship with them. And through that process, I got a chance to really talk and see firsthand how difficult it was for people who started ministries like that to get funded. And I had a lot of conversations with the director of the ministry there, and she just talked about how she had all these ideas for expanding the ministry and impacting people and changing lives and changing even communities. I was like, oh my goodness, that's incredible. But she's like, I can't get funded, and I've been trying, and all these different struggles with funding. I don't know the right people. My story, or her story, was really kind of the same as these inmates. She was in and out of prison, rough childhood, in drugs, all this stuff, and God saved her when she was in prison and helped her get out of prison and really restart her life. And so she had no connections in affluent people that could fund her or anything like that. And so that really, I think, planted the first seed in my mind for what started to grow. And so I just started praying, Lord, how do I fit into your plan, and how do I get involved in what you're doing, and how do I utilize the skills and interests that you've given me? Because you really gave me a lot of interest in entrepreneurship, starting businesses, right? And so I started to think about, okay, how can I start businesses that really have an impact and fund these ministry opportunities, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, fast forward, I end up going to University of Kentucky for
Mm-hmm.
mechanical engineering, because I'm like, well, this mechanical engineering fits, my mechanical mindset
Mm-hmm.
and construction, all these things. And ended up meeting my wife there at a campus ministry, which was
Wow.
incredible.
Yep.
But other than
Mm-hmm.
that, I really didn't get much out of college. I didn't really fit, didn't really love it. It was very difficult, very challenging academically. But I started looking at the job opportunities, and I was like, man, I really don't think I'll like these job opportunities. And I'm running out of cash to spend on college because I didn't want to go into debt, and was just using my savings and stuff.
Mm.
And so got to the point where I decided it was a good opportunity to drop out and start my own business. And of course, started a construction company.
Yeah.
Went kind of back to what I knew, and ended up growing that construction company over the next 5 years. And through that process, I started to learn how to hire people and how to manage people,
Mm-hmm.
and how to do customer service and all of these components. And we started to do some ministry within the context of the business with the employees, and serving our clients and things like that. And I got an opportunity to get involved in a Christian businessman group, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
in Lexington, and started to meet different people and learn more about Christian business and kind of the intersection of our faith
Mm-hmm.
and our business, right?
Yep.
And through that, I got an opportunity to hear an incredible story from Alan Barnhart. He came up to Lexington and spoke one day, and I just heard. For those of you who aren't familiar with Alan Barnhart, he owns Barnhart Crane and Rigging in Memphis, Tennessee, and it's become this national company, Crane and Rigging company. And they are, his story is really when he was young, I think around maybe 25, he and his brother started the company. They were going to go into missions or into business, and they couldn't really decide, but they felt like they were called to business. And they ended up doing about a year-long Bible study on wealth and the dangers of wealth and some of the pitfalls, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they really wanted to make sure that they were running their business biblically, but that they wouldn't fall prey to really the worshiping money and worshiping wealth and things like that.
Wow.
So they came away from this study realizing that God owns it all.
Mm-hmm.
It truly is His. Even the ability to make and earn wealth is something that He's given us, right? So it's truly His, and we don't need to raise our standard of living. We need to raise our standard of giving.
Mm.
And so the third thing was that they needed accountability in their life to really be able to hold themselves to these things. But long story short, they start the business, run it, I guess over the last 30 years into, this multi-billion-dollar company now. And they ended up giving, so along the way, they would give 50% of the profits to missions.
Wow.
And then the other 50% they would reinvest into the business. And they ended up, now they've actually given the entire company away into a like an NCF account, and so it's, or irrevocable trust maybe.
Yep.
But they've really given it away, and so it will continue to fund different missions and things like that.
Wow.
So anyway, I hear this story and get to talk to him, and he recommends a book called The Treasure Principle, and it's by Randy Alcorn, and it just really talks about in there about how we really worship money and worship wealth and worldly success, and it becomes our God, and we replace God with that, and that's how we find our security, in our money, and we find our identity in being successful and all of these things, right? And so it really changed the way that I did business, and really saw an opportunity to be even more generous, and starting really to pursue God's kingdom instead of my kingdom. And part of starting these businesses was like, man, I can be successful, I can grow this business, I can have all this wealth and be able to be in control, because that was a big thing for me, is like being in control, not so I could do bad things, but so that I can do what I want to do, maybe in a good way, right? And so that was kind of the start of the process of God really changing my heart on building my own kingdom and being in control, to giving him full control of my life. And I feel like I was like 70 or 80% surrendered to God. And he started putting in this idea in my mind through a lot of discipleship and mentoring from really amazing mentors and pastors. He started putting this idea in my mind that, like, maybe, like, what if I gave 100%? So what if I went in all in for God's kingdom? Right? Like, if I held nothing back, if I said, God, you own everything that I have, you own everything that I am, you created me, I want to fully surrender my entire life to you, and I want to do your will fully. And I think it took several months, if not years, for me to go from what if I did this and I went 100% in, to actually, like, praying a prayer and saying, God, I surrender everything to you, and I am all in for your kingdom. And I think even maybe, it took, I think it even took years, to get to that point. And it was really incredible. And so, in the construction company, I'm running the construction company, and we start making some money, and we're like, okay, how do we invest this in something that's really, truly going to matter? And so we start looking at the stock market, and we're like, yeah, we don't like that. There's no, like, we don't have any control over the value. And we start looking into real estate, and we're like, oh man, this seems to really fit, because, one, it's we can kind of control the value, because we have, our team of construction guys, we can remodel, we can do this and that. It's tangible, so I can see it, I can touch it, feel it. It's really, I'm a very, like, hands-on person, right? So that was really helpful. And then, everybody needs a place to stay, right? And so it really drew us in. And so we started flipping houses, and we start flipping houses, like, during the winter time, when our construction company's slow, to try to fill in and stuff. And then we're like, okay, we need to move to longer term investing and long-term hold, right? So we start buying rental property and burring it, and doing that. And we're like, okay, this makes a lot more sense. And now what happens is, we would buy the property, and once we got it cash flowing, then we'd actually give away the cash flow. And so 100% of the cash flow would go to our missionaries. And then, the long-term equity growth then would just be a long-term financial investment for us. And so we really liked that model, because we could, give more and more each year. We could fund more missionaries. We could have more impact through those missionaries. And we were like, okay, we're doing this on a little scale, just with, a few properties and stuff. And, what if we just created a model or a way that we could help others do this, that don't have to be active in real estate? They can be passive. They can, they might have the money, but they don't have the time or the energy or the knowledge to create all of these investment opportunities, right? And so that's where God is really leading us now. Is he seems to be showing us that we're just a very small piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
And that we're trying to do everything. And it's like, no, you just need to focus on, what I've called you to. And so he's given us this vision for creating a fund that would allow, thousands of people to pool their resources together, acquire apartment communities, and use the cash flow from that to then fund different mission organizations around the world.
Wow. That's awesome. So are you guys giving 100% of your cash flow at this time to missions, or?
Currently we are, yes.
Yeah. Wow. That's awesome. Man, I was going to ask like what that looks like. Is that because you said 100% in on God, and that's just about it, is just giving all the cash that you bring in?
So the way that I look at it is, and this goes back to the question in our mind where, we ask, what can we invest in that will truly matter? We want to think long term. And so we want to invest in things that will truly matter. And if you think, as a Christian, if you think long term, that's eternal, right? That's not just like, hey, I'm thinking 10 years out. No, it's not even thinking generationally. It's thinking eternally, right? So if you're thinking eternally, what are the only things that are going to last in eternity?
Our souls.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so the more people that we can bring the gospel to, the more people that we can bring into the kingdom to live in eternity with us in heaven, worshiping God, that's really the only thing that's going to matter.
Yep.
Ultimately.
Amen. Yep.
And so we were like, okay, by investing this, cash, this paper, we can buy these rental properties, use the cash flow to sustainably fund different mission organizations around the world who are sharing the gospel with hundreds of thousands of people, and inviting them into the kingdom. Like, what better way to invest is there?
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, that's yeah. Don't lay up treasures here on earth, lay them up in heaven. I think that sounds right on cue there.
Exactly. But I was reading that actually 2 days ago, and I was reading through it, and I was like, man, like, we just always read over this verse, and we're like, man, yeah, that's cool and everything, but we don't take it seriously.
Right.
Really don't live like that, right?
Yep.
And what's cool is, if you look at it, if you think about it, if you're looking at a real estate operator or something and you want to vet them, right? You look at their track record.
Yep.
Right. You're working with somebody, you look at their track record. If you're hiring somebody, you look at their track record, right? So do they actually deliver what they promise? And that's really kind of how you gauge somebody.
Right.
Well, check this out. So for thousands of years, God has promised in the Old Testament, he makes promises and then he delivers. He makes promises and then he delivers. And there's so many prophecies in the Old Testament that have come true in the New Testament. And it's like, okay, God is the most reputable possible source. And Jesus himself died and rose from the dead. So like, I don't think there isn't anybody else that you should trust more than that, right?
Right. Yep.
And he's saying that you need to store up your treasure in heaven. Okay, I need to start listening to him. Like, that's legit. Like, I don't know. It's silly that we don't take him seriously. And like, even his literal words, like, I'm reading through like the Beatitudes and stuff, and it's like, wait, what? You said this? Like, it's opposite of our like human logic, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And so it's really, really neat. And so when you start living like that, it's like, man, this is wild. And
Yeah.
this is kingdom impact,
Mhm.
right? So over the last year or so, since we really went in on this full time and are building relationships around the country and meeting incredible kingdom-minded real estate investors, operators, people who have thousands of units and really have done this for decades and have the experience and the track record, we want to partner with them and work with them so we can really bring a team together to accomplish this. And through that process, we've been able to meet these incredible people with these awesome stories. And so one of the things that we're doing is we realize that not a lot of people get to see how God's economy works and how there are tons of people around the world that are investing in God's economy, doing incredible things for God, and really in the business world, in the real estate world, they're using their business and investments to further the kingdom.
Right.
And so because of, hearing Alan Barnhart's story early on and that really changing my trajectory, I want to share those stories with other people. And so we're getting ready at the end of this month to launch a podcast called the Kingdom Investor Podcast.
Yep.
It's going to share those stories with, whoever wants to listen.
Right.
And really, try to unpack like, okay, how did God transform your life? What did that look like? How were you, successful in business? And a lot of these people are, incredibly successful in business, and then they realize that it's not fulfilling. They get to the, super wealthy status, and they're like, wait a second, like God's calling me into something so much greater. Let me pursue that. But then they use their skill, their business, their ability, and their treasure, earthly treasure, to invest in God's kingdom and to have so much more treasure in heaven. And so, we just want to highlight those, showcase those, and meet more people like that, and allow business owners and people who are maybe not as far along in the process see that and be able to grow in generosity and impact more lives, and really start to think about building a godly legacy that really lasts.
Wow, that's amazing. And it's honorable. It's encouraging. I'm curious as to how you go about getting in touch with these guys. Are they just people that you've met along the way, or what's your tactic when it comes to networking and meeting these godly men and women?
So that's a good question. A lot of it's just been hustle, and like, I meet one person and I'm like, okay, who's the most incredible person you met? And and then I meet them, and then I meet, that next person, and the next person, and the next person, and the next person, and the next person, and just meeting. And, it helps that I'm going after a goal that is way bigger than myself, and really ultimately completing the Great Commission is really the vision that I've set is, okay, so, my wife and I go and look at, okay, what can we invest our lives in that will truly matter, right? For all eternity. And, we start reading the Bible and more thoroughly and look at, okay, what is God calling us to do?
Right.
And, Jesus himself tells us, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them all that I have commanded you. And that's the last command that he gives us. And it's really a mission statement, right? And so, 2,000 years ago, he gives us that, and we still haven't completed it.
Right.
And so it's like, okay, let's look into that and see, why we haven't completed it. And so, we've been researching and learning a ton about the Great Commission. We have incredible friends in different mission opportunities and organizations around the world, and are starting to meet more and more. And I've been on 2 mission trips this year, one to Central Asia, a country I'm not allowed to talk about because it's a closed country,
Wow.
and then one to Panama more recently. But what we're learning is that there are over 3 billion people that don't have any access to the gospel.
Wow.
And when we say they don't have any access to the gospel, it's they don't have any friends who are believers. They don't have any churches in their community. They don't sometimes even have any Bible in their own language.
Right. Well.
And so they are truly unreached.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are numerous countries that are unreached. And most of the people groups that are unreached live in the 1040 window from North Africa all the way to South Asia. It's the latitude 1040 window.
Yep.
So if you look it up, but within that area, what we found is within that area, 90% of all unreached people live. And only 1% of our missions funding globally goes to those areas.
Wow.
And so it's a huge imbalance.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're like, okay, from the giving side, once we generate this funding and everything, how do we allocate it well around the world? And then who do we partner with and give to that is effectively reaching those unreached people groups? And so that's kind of the other piece of the puzzle that we have to solve is, we've got kind of this model for generating sustainable giving, but then once we generate that, where do we give globally? And then who do we partner with? And so those are the other two pieces that we're working on so that we can create this cohesive model where somebody can really just plug and play, and they can say, hey, I'm going to, drop $100,000 investment into this vehicle, and it's going to be producing thousands of dollars to these specific ministries in these specific countries to really reach these most needed areas globally.
Wow. That's incredible. I've seen that area mapped out on a map, and it's actually at the church that we're going to here, and I'm just like curious as to what it resembles. But now you're making it clear that that's the area that needs the gospel. And Daniel, I think that's such a good way to close, because I really think we take for granted here in America just how prevalent the gospel is, and like the problem is a lot of people have been raised up with the message, but they don't have the relationship that it takes, the life-changing impact that the gospel has. And so it's encouraging to hear about these. I mean, I'd say encouraging to hear about these unreached areas, because that's like that just puts it in perspective how much we have at our fingertips here in America and all over the developed nations. And so I guess, Daniel, anybody that's listening, how can they get in contact with you? How can they help you? I mean, any closing thoughts? Because we do have people that aren't necessarily believers in the audience. So I don't know if you have any wisdom to impart before we close this thing up.
Well, I would say when you start anything, begin with the end in mind. Like, what is the purpose? Why are you doing it? And get really clear on that before you get into it. Because if you do something and then it's like, well, I use the analogy of you don't want to spend your life climbing a ladder only to realize at the top that it's leaning against the wrong building.
Yep.
So find the right building, right?
Right.
Get to climbing. So.
Wow, that's so good. And yeah, that's something I've been hearing a lot more of. So that might be God speaking to me, is just check yourself every once in a while, especially when you're reading the Bible, because you do ponder on some of those verses, especially the ones about money. You're like, no, that's not, I've heard this before, not really me. But then you read it a second or a third time and you're like, oh wait, there's a lot more to this. So that's awesome. Well,
so Chris, to kind of answer your question, so one of the big things for finishing the Great Commission in this generation, which I believe is possible, is unity and bringing everyone together and working together to accomplish this, because this is the biggest, goal ever, right?
Yeah, right.
Probably the most life-changing thing that we could possibly do.
Mm-hmm.
And so I am willing to meet with anybody to talk, to help. If I can connect them, I'm becoming this connector where I can plug people in to where they fit and help them meet the right people.
Yeah.
If they want to reach out to me with email, it's daniel@thekingdominvestor.com.
Mm-hmm.
And then our podcast that we're launching is the Kingdom Investor Podcast. And just got our social media pages up. We've got Facebook, Instagram. We're launching a YouTube channel, and then we have LinkedIn. So
that's awesome, man. And yeah, I'll be sure to link all that in the show notes. And listeners, be sure to reach out to Daniel. He's a wealth of knowledge, and he's just doing God's work literally here on earth. So Daniel, it's a pleasure. Before we hang up, man, I do ask one final question to all our guests here on the Know Your Numbers podcast. And that is, Daniel White, what is one truth about money that most people regard as myth?
Ooh, one truth about money. I mean, the classic one, would be that, money would buy happiness. That's a little cliche, but I think the thing is that money can be used by Satan to really draw us away from God. And because we don't realize the risk that money can play in our own heart, we kind of overlook that. And so, I would really say that, as entrepreneurs, as business owners, as investors, we really need to check our heart with how we relate to money. And money's neutral, right? It's not necessarily good or bad, but more often than not, we can worship money in finding security, finding identity, finding purpose, and power in money. And so it's I think it's probably the most prevalent false god that we worship. And it's the most accepted, especially in America. It's the most accepted and probably the most common. And so if you think about, people warn you against, hey, don't abuse alcohol, or, don't do drugs or whatever. And it's like, those are obvious, right? Yeah. Because you see the effects, but it's harder to see the effects of money. And I think since money is so highly praised and worshiped in our culture, we don't really notice that it's a false god. Yeah.
That's so good. I'd stand in agreement with you. And there's a reason that Jesus talked about it more than anything else. And it's the most noted topic in the Bible. So Daniel, man, what a pleasure it is. What an honor it is to have you on. And I'm just excited to see what God has in store for you and your business and your family. And to the listeners out there, we thank you for tuning in. Be sure to check out Daniel on all things social media. We'll link all his contact information in the show notes. But in the meantime, keep doing God's work out there and stay blessed.
Chris, thank you so much.
My pleasure, brother.